The following is for mature audiences only, so if you aren't cool with dark, disturbing, and depraved, you might want to keep it moving. Welcome to 10-Minute Murder.
It was a Thursday night in downtown Denver, and 19-year-old Kenia Monge had a fake ID, some bad luck, and a group of friends who weren't exactly keeping track of her. By the next morning, her boyfriend realized she had not made it home. Her phone and purse were still at the club, and a random guy named Travis was texting her about his white, creepy van. And yes, that's what he called it. That is a direct quote. What followed was a bizarre game of cat and mouse involving bleach, a walk-in freezer, and a man who thought he was just clever enough to get away with it all. But Kenia's stepdad, he wasn't about to let this slide. This is a story of a family's relentless pursuit of answers, a predator who couldn't help but leave breadcrumbs, and how justice finally caught up. But before we get into that story, if you like your true crime brief and bingeable, you found the right podcast. Tap the follow button now for access to at least 2 episodes per week. And now, let's get into it. March 31st, 2011 was just another busy evening in downtown Denver. The city hummed with the energy of nightlife. Clubs overflowing, streets bustling, and drinks flowing a little too freely. Outside of the 24K lounge, one young woman stood out from the crowd. Barely under 5 feet tall, Kenia Monge lingered near the entrance. Her friends were still inside, partying on, oblivious to the fact that Kenia had left without her phone, her keys, or purse, all of which were still sitting on the table. Kenia wasn't worried about her belongings, though. She had bigger problems. Alone, likely tipsy from the night's drinks, she'd been separated from her group. What began as a typical night out for a 19-year-old with a fake ID was about to spiral into something far more sinister. Kenia wasn't always a Denver resident. She was born in Honduras to a mother who was still a child herself. Maria had Kenia when she was just 15 years old. Life in Honduras was tough, and Maria's family scraped together every bit they could to send Maria to the United States at 16 years old, hoping she could build a better future. Maria's journey to the United States wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. She found her footing, married Tony Lee, and built a family that included 2 more daughters. But Kenia wasn't a part of that picture, yet. It wasn't until 2004, when Kenia was 12 years old, that Maria finally saved enough to bring her daughter out to join them. For Kenia, the move to America was life-changing. She soaked up every bit of it. The new language, new culture, and new opportunities. She quickly adapted, excelling in school and forming strong bonds with her sisters and stepfather, Tony. In fact, it took only a few weeks for Kenia to start calling Tony Dad. Kenia wasn't just surviving in her new life, she was thriving. After graduating high school, she moved in with her boyfriend, Louis Easton, ready to take on adulthood. But like many 19-year-olds testing the boundaries of independence, Kenia had a rebellious streak. She and her friends managed to snag fake IDs and frequently sneaked into Denver's nightclubs. That's how Kenia found herself outside the 24K lounge that fateful night in March 2011. What should have been an ordinary night of bending the rules turned into a nightmare. The next morning, Kenia's boyfriend, Louis Easton, woke up expecting to find her at home. But her side of the bed was empty, and Kenia was nowhere to be found. Panic set in quickly. He called her family, and together they began retracing her steps from the night before. Her friends were easy enough to track down. They still had her phone, wallet, and keys. The sight of Kenia's personal belongings in her friend's possession only deepened the family's unease. Why would she leave without them? Where could she have gone with no money, no ID, and no way to call for help? The Monge family reached out to the police to file a missing persons report. But instead of urgency, they were met with indifference. They were told to wait 72 hours, an eternity for a family already fearing the worst. Waiting wasn't an option for Tony Lee. Kenya's stepfather. He was determined to do something, anything, to find her. While combing through Kenya's phone, a strange text message caught his eye. It was from an unknown number and read, "Hey, this is Travis, the guy who gave you a ride last night. White, creepy van, smiley face. Did you get home okay?" Most people might have zeroed in on the words "white, creepy van" as a major red flag, but Tony focused on the sender. Who was Travis? And why did he have Kenya's phone number? And why hadn't Kenya made it home if she'd been given a ride home? Tony wasted no time. He began calling Travis repeatedly, demanding answers. After a day of dodging Tony's calls, Travis finally picked up. What he said did little to ease the family's fears. According to Travis, he'd spotted Kenya outside the club the night before, talking to a homeless man. She seemed drunk and lost, so Travis, in what he described as an act of kindness, offered to give her a ride home. Kenya accepted the offer, but then changed her mind mid-ride, asking Travis to stop at a gas station so that she could buy some cigarettes. Here's where the story gets murkier. Travis claimed Kenya didn't have any money to buy cigarettes, became angry, and stormed off toward a man he referred to as Dan. According to Travis, Kenya walked away with this mysterious stranger, and that was the last he saw of her. Tony didn't buy it for a second, but he wasn't about to let Travis off the hook. When Travis offered to meet Tony at the same gas station where he'd allegedly dropped off Kenya, Tony agreed, but not without preparing for the worst. Tony tucked a gun into his waistband before heading out to meet Travis. Maria, terrified that the situation could turn violent, called the police to intervene. Although the family still wasn't allowed to file a missing person report officially, law enforcement sensed the brewing tension and sent an officer to the gas station to keep things from escalating. When Travis showed up, he stuck to his story, but something wasn't right. Both Tony and the officer noticed a strong, unmistakable smell of bleach wafting from Travis's van. It was suspicious, to say the least. The officer dug a little deeper and discovered that Travis Forbes wasn't exactly an upstanding citizen. At 31 years old, Travis already had a rap sheet that included burglary, harassment, and a history of violating probation. He'd even been on probation for domestic violence at the time Kenya disappeared. Despite these red flags, the police couldn't charge Travis with anything related to Kenya's disappearance. Not yet. And with no legal grounds to hold him, they let him go. When Kenya's family was finally allowed to file a missing persons report, investigators began piecing together the puzzle of her disappearance. One of their first major breaks came from security footage at a bakery that Travis rented for his business. The footage painted a chilling picture. On the evening of April 1st, just one day after Kenya vanished, Travis was seen alone, wearing long latex gloves. He wheeled a duct tape cooler into the walk-in freezer before heading back to his van with a bottle of bleach. Moments later, he returned and shut off the bakery's security cameras. This was a flashing neon sign to detectives, but they needed more to connect Travis directly to Kenya's disappearance. When they brought him in for questioning, Travis doubled down on his story he'd given Tony at the gas station. He claimed he'd dropped off Kenya at the gas station and then gone home to his girlfriend. Conveniently, his girlfriend backed up his alibi. However, phone records told a different story. Travis's phone pinged in Keensburg, over 40 miles away from the gas station, during the crucial hours of Kenya's disappearance. By the time investigators uncovered this, though, they'd already released Travis. As news of Kenya's case spread, Travis wasted no time inserting himself into the story. He appeared in multiple media interviews, playing the role of a helpful citizen. In some of these interviews, he even pretended to forget Kenya's name, a calculated move to distance himself from suspicion. But the pressure from both the media and law enforcement started to close in. Feeling the heat, Travis fled Denver and resurfaced in Austin, Texas, where he was arrested for stealing a friend's car. His friend later dropped the charges, and once again, Travis slipped through the cracks. Back in Colorado, investigators grew increasingly certain that Travis was involved, but without definitive proof, he remained free. On July 4th, 2011, just a few months after Kenya's disappearance, 30-year-old Lydia Tillman's life changed forever. Lydia had recently moved to Fort Collins, Colorado, and was still settling into her new home. As she walked to her apartment that evening, a man shoved her through the door and locked it behind them. What followed was a brutal attack. Lydia was raped, beaten, and strangled until her jaw shattered. Her attacker doused her in bleach and set her apartment on fire before leaving her for dead. But Lydia wasn't done fighting. Through the flames and unimaginable pain, she crawled to her second-story window and jumped. First responders arrived just in time to save her life. Lydia suffered a stroke and spent 5 weeks in a coma, but her resilience was nothing short of remarkable. Detectives had their suspicions about Travis Forbes' involvement in Lydia's attack and placed him under surveillance. Early on July 10th, officers watched as he approached a woman outside of a club. When the pair began walking off together, police stepped in, worried the woman could be his next victim. Travis tried to lie his way out, giving officers a fake name, which conveniently allowed them to bring him back in for questioning. Meanwhile, forensic results came back from Lydia's case. The DNA under her fingernails was a match to Travis Forbes. This was the turning point. With undeniable evidence against him, Travis could no longer bluff his way out. Faced with the evidence from Lydia's attack, Travis knew his luck had run out, but instead of confessing to what he had done to Lydia, he chose a different path. In a bid to avoid being labeled a sex offender, a designation he clearly feared more than life in prison, Travis confessed to the murder of Kenia Monge. According to Travis, the events of that night began with him and a friend spotting Kenia outside of the 24K lounge. They initially tried to find her a cab to get her home, but when that didn't work, Travis decided to give her a ride himself. After dropping his friend off, Travis realized Kenia had fallen asleep in the back of his van. That's when his predatory instincts took over. He attempted to sexually assault her, but Kenia woke up and fought back. In response, Travis strangled her to death. Travis led investigators to a field in Keensburg where he had buried her in a shallow grave. It was there that Kenia's remains were finally recovered, giving her family the devastating closure they had been searching for. In the courtroom, Travis pled guilty to first-degree murder. His confession spared him from the death penalty, but it sealed his fate: life in prison without the possibility of parole. The evidence from Lydia Tillman's case couldn't be ignored, and Travis was also convicted for her brutal assault. Lydia's remarkable survival and her willingness to testify ensured that Travis faced consequences for both of his heinous crimes. Travis Forbes' case left an indelible mark on Denver and beyond. Kenia's murder and Lydia's survival highlighted critical failures in the justice system that allowed a known predator to slip through the cracks multiple times. Kenia's family has worked tirelessly to honor her memory, and Lydia has become a symbol of resilience and strength, showing the world what it means to fight back against impossible odds. That's 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. If you're new here, hit follow so you don't miss the next one. You can also find me on social media or at 10minutemurder.com. I'm really doing more and more on TikTok now until it gets banned again, which if you're listening to this later, it might already be banned. But if it's not, if it's still a thing, TikTok is still a thing, give me a follow there. And hey, if you like the brief and bingeable vibe of this podcast, but you don't always want the story to be so dark, you can check out my other podcast, 10-Minute Mystery. And that's going to do it. That is your episode for today. Thank you so much for listening.